Speakers today. I have next to me our High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Volker Türk. Next to him, we have the Honorable Mr. Dr. Asif Nazrul, who is the Ministry of Law, Justice and Parliamentary Affairs representative from the Government of Bangladesh. Next to him, we have Ms. Farhana Sharmeen Imu. And then we have here Mr. Mir Mahmood Rahman, who will also be our speakers today, representing civil society in Bangladesh. Each of the speakers will deliver a brief presentation, followed by a Q&A session with you all, and then there will be closing remarks. So without further delay, let me pass the floor to our High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Türk. Please.
No, I'm really extremely grateful that we have an opportunity to focus on a situation that preoccupied first and foremost people in Bangladesh themselves, but also many of us at the global level. And we watched what was happening in this period from July to August in particular of last year, and we followed the events almost on a daily basis, and we were really there with the people of Bangladesh. And I just want to acknowledge this, and I think it's also important in the context of, I know it's a side event, in the context of the Human Rights Council, to have a chance to go through what has been happening. And again, I remember very well my first conversation with the chief advisor, Professor Mohammed Yunus, on the 14th of August, where he requested me to deploy an independent, impartial fact-finding team to look into the violations and abuses that had been committed between 1st of July and 15th of August. And I thought this was an incredibly important signaling and recognition that truth-telling and accountability are really essential to move forward. And in fact, one of the questions that the chief advisor asked me then was, how can we make sure that such repression will never happen again? So within a couple of weeks, we managed to deploy a team on the ground comprising investigators, forensic specialists, weapons experts, and they spent nearly 2 months there. They, as you know, did a lot of research analysis, talked to a lot of survivors and victims. And I have to say, this deployment was possible in this rapid way also because we had just created a new human rights inquiries branch, so we could deploy our colleagues very quickly to respond to the request from the interim government of Bangladesh. And I also want to thank very much that we had been given full cooperation from the interim government, from the authorities throughout. And as you know, the aim was really, which I often say, it's about facts. What are the facts? What is the law? How do you apply the law to these facts? And what are the recommendations coming out of it? And obviously, when it comes to establishing the facts, we have a very strict standard methodology that we apply in these circumstances. It's important to say this because it's done in a way that ensures precisely that we keep the impartiality, that we are not only identifying what happened, those that are responsible, but also analyze some of the root causes and then are able to make very concrete recommendations. Of course, this is framed by international human rights law and standards. I would also like to express my deep gratitude to the survivors, to the victims, their families, the witnesses, the medical professionals, the experts, the national and international civil society organizations that were part of this. The key findings are that we have reasonable grounds to believe, and that is in the report that was, as you know, issued on the 12th of February this year. We believe that former government officials, members of the security and intelligence apparatus, and violent elements that were associated with the former ruling party, that they had committed serious, organized, and systematic human rights violations, which included hundreds of extrajudicial killings, extensive arbitrary arrest and detention, torture and ill treatment, including of children, as well as gender-based violence. And indeed, we know that there was knowledge, coordination, and direction of the former political leadership and senior security sector officials with the specific goal of suppressing the protests and keeping former government's grip on power. We also have reasonable grounds to believe that certain crimes against humanity were committed, directed against protesters and their supporters. And women and girls, as you know, were at the forefront of these early protests. They were subjected or threatened with gender-based violence by security forces and by these violent supporters. We managed to document also the deliberate obstruction of medical care by security forces and intelligence agencies. But we also, after the protests were over, we documented serious revenge acts by private individuals against supporters of the former ruling party, police officers, and in some cases minorities and distinct religious groups. So what are the next steps? And we will obviously hear also from our colleagues here. Of course, accountability is absolutely key, and we have seen it in so many other situations. Efforts have indeed begun. There are many cases lodged, including before Bangladesh's Domestic International Crimes Tribunal. Of course, it's always important to ensure that they fulfill due process guarantees, fair trial guarantees. And we keep raising the issue of the death penalty. The law advisor knows very well in my discussions when I was in Bangladesh. We obviously, as you know, the UN has a very clear position on this, and we always hope that there would be more moratorium pending the abolition of the death penalty. We have, of course, offered my office's support to advise the government to address these issues. But beyond accountability, there's, of course, also universal jurisdiction and even referral to the International Criminal Court by the government if they so wish. But it's also clear that beyond the criminal aspects, there is an issue of, and I remember my many discussions with the government, with the law advisor, but also with the chief advisor. It's about healing, it's about truth-telling, it's about reconciliation, memorialization, and reform. And we know how many efforts have gone into reform in particular. Again, this is very important. I had a chance to meet myself a number of the victims. I went to one of the hospitals in Bangladesh, and I could see and witness myself how many people, and particularly young people and children, have been affected by what happened. And they were still in treatment when I was there in November. And some of them have life-altering injuries. It's therefore also important, this is whatever the international community can do, we need resources for victim-centered reparation programs for compensation, long-term medical treatment, rehabilitation care, and of course livelihood opportunities for victims. Then the ongoing reform efforts, the legal institutional reform efforts are absolutely critical, but also to dismantle, to overhaul and dismantle the repressive laws and institutions that were there for much too long. And I really welcome the reform commissions that have been set up. And I was very impressed when I was there to meet the various heads of the reform commissions. And I thought this was incredibly important work for Bangladesh. I mean, we hope, and we are almost in the midst of this, pretty close discussions on how to strengthen the presence of my office in the country, to strengthen cooperation, to strengthen support, to provide independent assessment and advice. And we have been discussing this, and we have made a very, very strong progress. We also need member states to support us in this effort. I just want to flag this as well. And of course, human rights mechanisms can play a very important role. I think it's a really historic opportunity for the country to stop the cycle of reprisals that we have seen in the past, to bring the nation together, to engage in trust building and healing. And again, I want to go back to the witnesses, the victims, and the survivors. I know how much they appreciated. A lot of my colleagues told me how much they've reached out to thank the government, the interim government, but also my office for having been there and for undertaking this very important work of truth-telling. I mean, a female journalist, I just want to report this, who reported from the hospitals at the time. Throughout the protests, she wrote to us and she said, "I nearly cried reading the report because finally there is damning proof. Thank you so much for all your hard work." And from a witness we spoke to, and again I quote, "The recommendations in particular are crucial for ensuring the country's future stability, protecting human rights, and strengthening democracy." And I just want to say that because I think it is a testament also to how much, especially at a time when we have so many geopolitical tensions, how much the language of human rights, the daily work of human rights can play an important role in shaping and influencing and transforming societies for the better. So thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Just to let you know, the images that you're seeing behind you, behind us, are it's a small sampling of the images that were examined by the fact-finding team in carrying out their investigation using the methodology that the High Commissioner has described. I'll now pass the floor to Dr. Nazrul, please, for his intervention.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderator. High Commissioner, distinguished delegates, distinguished representative of the civil society. Thank you for organizing this event to highlight the struggle of Bangladeshi people during the historic July-August uprising of last year. On this occasion, I would like to remember and pay my respect to the martyrs of the July-August uprising, their families, and the people of Bangladesh who fought against the autocratic repressive regime. Their collective resolve for a just, inclusive, and functioning democracy, with the promotion and protection of human rights at its core, should define Bangladesh of the future and place our nation as a responsive and responsible state in the global community. Distinguished audience, on behalf of the people of Bangladesh and the government of Bangladesh, I express my sincere gratitude to OHCHR, to the High Commissioner in particular, the fact-finding team of OHCHR, who conducted the most thorough and credible investigation of the struggle and sacrifice of Bangladeshi people, particularly during the July uprising. The team's report rightly identifies extensive, horrendous, and grave human rights violations, including extrajudicial killing, arbitrary arrest, torture, and disproportionate use of force by the ousted ruling party during July-August massacre. Although this report was a result of human rights investigation, its finding and the evidences it collected would be pivotal for the accountability process for the atrocities and crimes committed. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to reaffirm the commitment of interim government for an impartial and credible investigation into the July-August massacre in Bangladesh and due judicial process for redress. To that extent, the International Crime Tribunal Act 1973 has already been amended to ensure fair trial and transparent judicial process. Among other things, the amendments include redefining the offense in line with international standard, widening the defense rights in judicial process, allowing appointment of foreign lawyers and attendance of representatives from the United Nations and other human rights organizations in public hearing and trial. Distinguished audience, High Commissioner Türk has rightly underscored the importance of a comprehensive process of truth-telling, reparation, and reform as the path to national healing. In this regard, apart from facilitating the work of the OHCHR fact-finding team, an independent commission of inquiry was constituted in Bangladesh to look into all allegations of enforced and involuntary disappearance. The commission has already submitted an interim report titled Unfolding the Truth, and is expected to come up with their final report shortly. Let me also mention that the interim government has also decided to define and include enforced disappearance in our penal law and is seriously exploring the options of acceding to the optional protocol of the Convention Against Torture before 26 June. As for reparation and memorialization, our government has established the July Shaheed Memorial Foundation, undertaken extensive financial reparation program for the families of martyrs as well as for the wounded heroes of July. We also arranged long-term and, in cases, advanced medical treatment abroad for the critically injured and have undertaken initiative for livelihood opportunities. Distinguished audience, in order to restore people's trust and confidence and to ensure that the tragic past never recur in future Bangladesh, our government initiated reform in certain important sectors and formed 15 different reform commissions. Already 6 reform commissions have submitted their final report. Many of the recommendations made in the OHCHR report are similar to the recommendation made by our reform commission, such as ensuring independent judiciary, professional police force, clear definition of roles of intelligence agencies. Our government aimed to establish effective safeguard mechanism to ensure the sustainability of these reforms. To that end, a National Consensus Commission, led by the Honorable Chief Justice, Dr. Muhammad Yunus himself, was formed, which has started consultation with the political parties and other stakeholders to implement the reform initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to reiterate that we would utilize the finding of the report as applicable in our ongoing national accountability process to ensure justice. We would also embed, to the extent possible, the findings and the recommendations in our relevant reform processes. Finally, I wish to assure you that our constructive engagement with the OHCHR will not end with the report only. Rather, our government is chalking out how we could better utilize the broader mandate of the High Commissioner's Office in our effort for the promotion and protection of human rights of all of our citizens. We also appreciate the readiness of High Commissioner's Office to provide technical assistance and support to our ongoing reform initiative and national accountability process. I thank you. Distinguished audience, may I now request your kind attention to watch a video. It's entitled Jatrabari, Evidence of a Massacre. And I'm really grateful to David Bergman for producing this video. He's here. Thank you, David. And I would like to request the moderator to please play the video. Now, I'm just telling you, this is a first 3 minutes version of the video, and it's only tips of the iceberg of what happened in Bangladesh.
What follows is a forensic analysis of mass shootings which took place outside Jatrabari police station on the 5th of August 2024. It was compiled in September 2024 from verified contemporaneous cell phone and social media footage. In early August 2024, Bangladesh was in turmoil, convulsed by popular calls for the resignation of the country's autocratic Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina. Weeks of student-led protests, initially over job quotas, had been met with brutal police repression, costing the lives of hundreds of people. But on the 5th of August, as thousands set off on what was called the Long March to Dhaka, ending at the Prime Minister's official residence, some felt change might finally be coming. One of the routes to the demonstration ran alongside the Mayor Hanif flyover and past Jatrabari police station. Cell phone footage overlooking the police station just before 2 p.m. records the moment a large number of police officers in full riot gear emerged from the station compound, firing towards protesters on the road. This footage and related metadata has been examined by technical experts and verified as authentic and unmanipulated. For this film, some original clips have been enlarged and enhanced for clarity. In the very first frame of the clip, a group of 4 protesters can be seen desperately trying to escape as police just meters away fire in their direction. Video does not show what happened to them, but we can hear witnesses shout in alarm. Most of the fire is directed to the right of the screen, towards the marchers. There is no indication they pose any threat to justify police use of deadly force. Several officers are firing 12-gauge pump-action shotguns, which can be loaded with lethal or less than lethal payloads. Subsequent images of injuries examined by a firearms expert are consistent with the use of lethal cartridges loaded with lead pellets. After a minute or so, some police officers take more careful aim. The weapons used by the 2 officers kneeling at the front here have been identified by the firearms expert as Chinese Type 56 AK pattern rifles.
Thank you, Law Advisor. The video demonstrates exactly what happened and what we are trying to address here. It was an important reminder for
I would
the
request you
audience.
to watch the full video, please. Then you will understand what happened in Bangladesh.
Our next speaker is someone who was involved in helping the injured protesters. In fact, Ms. Farhana Sharmin Imu, who is an architect by profession, created a voluntary group to care for the injured protesters. The group worked alongside medical students and volunteers, providing care to patients and conducting daily groundwork. Please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished guests who are here and who are watching now. My deepest thanks to OHCHR for the report on the human rights violations during the July-August 2024 protests in Bangladesh. Following the tragic events of July and August, like many others, my immediate concern was for the injured. Without a clear plan, I turned to a WhatsApp group of mostly architects urging action. What began with 5 individuals quickly grew into a network of 650 professionals from various fields. Together, we provided urgent aid to over 500 injured victims across 5 hospitals, and later established long-term guardianship support for more than 50 severely injured individuals. As our efforts expanded, we coordinated with other volunteer groups, relevant agencies, and interim government representatives to structure a more effective response. With this concern, I stand before you today as a representative of the civil society of Bangladesh, speaking on behalf of the victims, our national fighters, and the dedicated volunteers working tirelessly for them. These voices are grounded in first-hand experience. I am Farhana Sharmin Imu, and I deeply appreciate this opportunity. The casualties from the July-August protests, as documented in the OHCHR report, are staggering. At least 1,400 deaths and thousands of life-altering injuries. But numbers alone cannot capture the true impact. One bullet, one injury does not just harm one individual person. It devastates an entire family. Take the case of one of the protesters from our long-term list, a garment worker and the sole breadwinner of his family, shot on July 18. He spent over 3 months in the hospital, surviving on loans, still unable to walk. His children had to leave school and go for work just to afford basic necessities. One bullet didn't just wound him, it stole the future of two bright students and plunged a family into crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, crisis none of us from here can imagine. On behalf of thousands of such families, on behalf of not only those who lost loved ones, but also those whose futures have been shattered, I stand before you to call upon the world to seek justice. You know, one of the greatest challenges we encountered throughout the last 7 months was deep-rooted inequality. Over 90% of those affected came from poor, lower middle, and middle-class backgrounds. These affected families needed more than financial aid. They needed guidance to navigate their new, uncertain lives. Compensation alone, whether 100,000, 300,000, 500,000 taka in Bangladeshi currency, cannot address their sufferings or secure their futures. Consider another protester, a 17-year-old boy, whose harrowing video circulated widely, showing him clinging to the edge of an under-construction building, shot 6 times in the lower body. He spent a month in a dark, cramped slum house, unsure of where to seek help. Despite financial aid, he remained helpless with very limited emergency medical aid. Then, under our guardianship, he received critical medical care, underwent several surgeries, and extensive physiotherapy. Today, this boy can walk again. Cases like these led us to focus on sustainable support, pairing injured individuals with guardians, many of whom are Bangladeshi expatriates. The grassroots effort, born out of urgency, evolved into a structured movement for long-term solutions. But this experience also exposed something deeper: systemic inequalities that keep the vulnerable trapped in cycles of suffering. Now, with the OHCHR report, the facts put together in documented form, Bangladesh seeks justice. But justice is more than punishing perpetrators. Justice means dismantling the very inequalities that made these individuals so vulnerable in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, the July movement was a fight against discrimination and inequality. While authoritarian barriers to medical care have been lifted, the process remains painfully slow. Good intentions exist, yet inequality continues to hinder real progress. This is where I think the international organizations, international community can play a vital role. Justice is a long process, one that must center the victims themselves. We have to keep it in mind that the victims' immediate need is survival, physical recovery, and long-term psychosocial support with proper coordination and oversight. Fair treatment for victims and holding perpetrators responsible must go hand in hand. Only by addressing both can we prevent such tragedies from happening again. I will end with the words of one of our injured protesters. When asked what justice meant to him, he replied, "Do something sustainable. so that in the future, no man can arbitrarily shoot or demean any innocent poor man. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ms. Sharmeen, thank you for sharing these individual stories of tragedy, but also of resilience, and for reminding everyone that justice must be a victim-centered process. Absolutely. Our next speaker is Mr. Mir Mahmudur Rahman. Mr. Rahman is a marine engineer who has lost his younger brother during the July-August protests. He's taken an active engagement to support victims and their families in their search for justice. Please, Mr. Rahman.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of you. It's an honor for me. And I introduce myself as a proud citizen of Bangladesh, a beautiful and peace-loving nation, known to many as the country of Nobel Peace Prize winner, Professor Dr. Muhammad Yunus. So, however, it is also the country where the tragic July-August uprising took place. And the reasons are already before you. I'm marine engineer Mir Mahmudur Rahman Dipto, a member of one of the victim families. My younger brother, Mir Mahfuzur Rahman Mugdho, was shot in the forehead during the uprising. He was unarmed and harmless, helping the injured reach hospitals, distributing water and food, serving humanity, as he always did. But this time he was shot dead on the spot. This is how humanity dies. His death made headlines worldwide because we refused to stay silent, unlike many who had to. Out of fear, some couldn't even mourn to bury their loved ones. Ordinary people suffered. Rickshaw pullers who acted as ambulances were shot. Peaceful protesters silenced. Bright young talents like Abu Said, Nafis, Shaikat, Yamin, Jahidul Tanveen, women like Naima Sultana, and children like Jabir Ibrahim. So many lives lost, forever missed. Today we stand as one family, united in our demand for justice. Being Bangladesh, a peaceful nation itself, never expected its own citizens to be killed by those meant to protect them. The world must take note. I thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for their commitment to bring the truth in front of the world. This report is not just numbers, it holds the pain, loss, and struggle for justice of real people. I see my own grief and the one of many others reflected in this report. Justice is not a single act, but a process, one that demands prosecution, truth-seeking, reparations, and institutional reforms. For victims, justice means accountability, not just for those who pulled the trigger, but also for those who gave the orders. There has been some progress. The International Crimes Tribunal has begun contacting victims' families, and Home Ministry officials are now holding bi-weekly meetings to update us on investigations. But gaps remain. Many victims still wait for their voices to be heard, while others have lost faith in a system that has failed them repeatedly. These gaps mean continued trauma, social divisions, and the risk of history repeating itself. The international community must do more than issue statements. Decisive action is needed, supporting independent investigations, enforcing consequences for non-compliance, and ensuring justice mechanisms center on survivors. Political interests must never overshadow fundamental human rights. Symbolic gestures are not enough. Governments must strengthen domestic justice systems. International bodies must enforce accountability, and civil society must push for lasting change. From this tragedy, a new slogan has emerged in Bangladesh, that is Abu Said Mugdho Shesh Hoy Nai Juddho, which means Abu Said Mugdho, the fight isn't finished yet. We don't stop when we are tired, we stop when we are done. We need your help, the world's help, to rebuild, reform, and achieve justice. Will you stand with us? My younger brother believed that no one would fire at students. He told me, we have the history of 1952, 1969. Whenever students were shot, the outcome was tragic. Our country won't make the same mistake again. But the very next day, he was proven wrong as he fell, shot in the head. Accountability is not just about addressing past crimes. It is about shaping a future where such violent acts are never tolerated again. If we fail to act, we send a message that impunity is acceptable. But if we commit to justice, we reaffirm the dignity of the victims and ensure history doesn't repeat itself anywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rahman, for your courage and for sharing the story of loss through your brother's story, sharing other stories as well.
Sit down.
And indeed, shaping a future where such violent acts are not tolerated again. We'll now open the floor to questions. Please hold your placard up. And for those of you who don't have a placard, please feel free to just put your hand up. I will ask you to please keep your interventions very brief. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, and we also want to save some time for the closing statements of all our speakers. So kindly introduce yourselves and indicate if your question is directed at anyone in particular. We can start over there, please. Sir.
With Forum Asia. The question is mainly for the High Commissioner. Our question relates to your recommendations to the Council. As a number of us civil society organizations have expressed in our engagements with your office, we had hoped the report will also make clear recommendations for the Council in supporting the implementation of the recommendations. At this critical juncture in Bangladesh, where the situation remains fragile and uncertain, we believe the Council could provide a stable and sustained framework for international engagement and play an important preventive role and support international monitoring, investigations, as well as domestic reform initiatives by the interim government. So what would be your recommendation for the Council? And finally, we also urge you to consider a follow-up initiative before the end of the year in the form of a dedicated intersessional briefing on the progress in the implementation of the recommendations of your office. We believe such a briefing could provide an opportunity for the Council members and civil society victims and survivors to assess how recommendations by your office have been implemented ahead of a sensitive time period as the country heads for potential elections which could take place at the end of this year or early next year. Thank you.
In sets of several sets at once, so we can get as many in as possible. The representative of Saudi Arabia, I believe.
For giving me the floor. Let me first start by thanking the government of Bangladesh for its constructive engagement. And I would like to ask, what are the measures the government of Bangladesh has taken for the treatment of the victims? Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, High Commissioner, and to your office for holding this event and for all the work that you've done on Bangladesh. We salute to the people of Bangladesh for everything that they have experienced and everything that you are now trying to do to address this difficult time in your history. But there are a lot of positive aspects, as we've just been discussing, arising out of what was undeniably a very tragic period. We're grateful to the High Commissioner in particular we agree with you that what you were able to do last summer was a good demonstration of the office's ability to act in an agile way and to be responsive. We're also very grateful, as you said at the start, for your emphasis on rigorous methodology. Our question would be, perhaps if you are able to at this point, either of you, to expand a little bit on the outlook for support from the Office of the High Commissioner and the way in which that feeds into what I think, as you've all been outlining, will be a long process of national healing going forward, which we're obviously also very keen to support. Thank you.
I'm Beatrice Kalimanshi, working with the International IG. I have an observation to make, please. The violent atrocities against the minority in Bangladesh, in being termed as revenge violence, And I beg to state that the word revenge is wrong. And the violence perpetrated by mob against the minorities, including minority religious and leaders and human resources, to which activists was provoked, and also done to legitimize the control of interim group in power. That's all what I observed.
Thank you. My question is to Advisor Nazrul. My name is Suhas Chakma from the Rights and Risk Analysis Group. Will the interim government of Bangladesh extend democracy to the Chittagong Hill Tracts, where both the Hill District Council and the Regional Council never had elections from 1989? So, I mean, will the government of Bangladesh take measures to hold elections to ensure that people could exercise democracy in that region too?
I'm Sanjida Islam. Thank you for allowing me here in this session. And we are really grateful to have a fact-finding such report, which is helping us our July, August protest and uprising, where we have sacrificed 2,000 and more lives. But beside that, we represent MyDuck, which is a platform of victims of enforced disappearances, which happened last decade, 1.5 decade during the Sheikh Hasina's regime. And we work as a shelter to do the advocacy for those victims across the country. And we encourage and we request for full support of the United Nations and advocate for a robust mechanism for fact-finding regarding such enforced disappearances and those human rights violations also, so which will help us to bring the truth in front of us, where families like us, I'm Sanjida, my brother's name is Shajdul Islam Shumon, we still not know whether my brother is alive or not, how the torture happened in the secret detention cells, how brutally they have given him the electric shocks, or they have thrown his dead bodies to the rivers or not. So those truths should come out. And for that one, I think we need a full support from the United Nations also to extensive support on those fact-finding, and also so that we firmly believe that apologizing for past actions is insufficient to restore justice. The path to healing involves uncovering the truth and ensuring those responsible for atrocities are held accountable. Together, we can work towards to, I think, have just and human society. And, we thank the interim government to form an inquiry commission on enforced disappearances. And, recently, they have identified and opened the secret detention cells where our chief advisor visited. So we want to restore those evidences, which is very crucial for us. And we want to emphasize the need for the military to acknowledge any involvement in these matters and strive for transparent communication in this. And also we call for accountability by ensuring that all state officials who have played a role in enforced disappearances are brought to justice. We support the establishment of swift and transparent trials that provide fair and exemplary consequences for those found guilty. I think, thank you.
We'll just call on this lady over here, and then the representative of the Netherlands, and then we'll pass the floor to the panel for their responses.
Hello everyone, I'm Noshin. I'm a law and policy student who was actively on streets during the July-August uprising. Meanwhile, my brother, who's 17-year-old, was shot, and it did not end there, because when we tried to take him to hospitals for treatment, he was denied treatment from almost all the hospitals, and he had to stay with the bullet in his body for 4 days. After that, somehow we managed to extract the bullet. The violation of human rights did not stop there yet, because when we brought him back home, every night we were scared that police might arrest him, because at that time, at that particular time in Bangladesh, being a student was a crime. Every door-to-door law enforcement agencies were going and asking, do you have a student? And even he's injured, he or she was being arrested. So here I want to stress on the fact that some people might have survived the injury, like my brother, thankfully, but it's not always only about the physical injury. Coming from Bangladesh, a country where mental health support seeking is not always welcomed, rather than it is considered as a taboo most of the time, how do we deal with this generation of people who are mostly 18 to 25 years of age, that this entire generation is traumatized? Someone might not have gotten shot himself, but he saw his friend getting killed right in front of his eyes. So how do we deal with these people, these students, these victims? And I would urge the interim government and also the international community to support the system institutionally to support these victims, because we need it, because we are talking about an entire generation who are traumatized. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. The representative of the Netherlands, please.
Arvina, I will be very brief. Thanks for this opportunity to hear from the office about its work in Bangladesh, but especially also to hear some of the individual stories of those affected. I took the floor to express our deep appreciation for the willingness of Bangladesh to seek justice in its broadest sense for the violations committed. And we encourage the government to continue this path towards accountability. And we're very pleased to hear today that the domestic accountability measures will be used for the implementation of the recommendations contained in the report. I don't have a specific question, but I wanted to briefly praise OHHR for its quick action upon Bangladesh's invitation. And it's good to see that the newly established Human Rights Inquiries Branch has made this possible. It's an excellent example of a joint effort of the country concerned and the office towards accountability. And we hope this will set a good example to other governments in the same situation. Thank you.
We will have to leave the room at 2 p.m. sharp. So I'll just call on that gentleman all the way in the back, and then we'll pass the floor to the panel.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I speak on behalf of a consortium of anti-torture organizations. We are called the United Against Torture Consortium, which includes Redress, IRCT, the OMCT, Omega, and for us, the Association for the Prevention of Torture. So we have just returned from Dhaka for 2 weeks, focusing on finding out ways in which we can support local government bodies and local actors in sustainable systemic reforms, as many of the panelists have said today. So my question is more for the OHCHR and the Law Advisor in terms of the follow-up initiatives. To the OHCHR, we'd like to find out more about your next steps, and in particular, many of the stakeholders that we have spoken to locally in Dhaka would welcome the establishment of an OHCHR office there to go forward for the implementations of the recommendations that you have come. And I think for the Law Advisor, I wonder for us in supporting our local partners for the next year in our project, whether you see the ability for major reforms in the security sector and in the criminal justice system prior to the hosting of elections, which I understand is your next priority. Thank you.
Sir, please, and then the High Commissioner.
There have been many questions. One particular question I'm interested to answer is somebody accused us of measures taken against the minority community. Let me clarify that there had been some incidents of political violence against the torturer, the hooligans of Awami League regime who oppressed and tortured people for many years, killed people. So there had been some incidents, and because of those incidents, a number of people who were deeply involved with the Awami League fascist regime, they were attacked. There had been some incidents like that. We strongly condemn that. But in most of the cases, those persons belong to Muslim community. Only a few of them belong to minority religions. So if you brand it as measures against minority community, I would beg to disagree. We have statistics, we have fact-checked information. If you like to talk after the incident, I'll show you. The second thing is there was one question about election in CHT. I should reaffirm that our government is committed to the voting right of every person in Bangladesh, be it at the CHT area, be it at any other places. And we have already formed a commission which will work on the local government issue. Third thing is I'm working with UNHCR, CHR, of course, we are looking forward to that. We have already agreed a draft text, and I think we could go a long way to work together, and we are deeply grateful to OHCHR for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, in terms of the Human Rights Council, first of all, I, as you know, in my global update referred specifically to the fact-finding report. I also referred to the situation in Bangladesh. It is a fact that the interim government, interim authorities have fully cooperated with us on the establishment of the report. We have now a process in place that seeks to follow up on the recommendations. Indeed, we are very close to hopefully finalizing our presence in the country, which would precisely be to provide the support, the technical cooperation on all the areas, including on the issue of disappearances. I mean, of course, we bring in also the mechanisms in fact, the interim government has already taken the steps to sign the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. There's a whole follow-up foreseen, because I fully agree with you. One of the truth-telling is about the fate of the disappeared people, because that brings closure for the families and for the loved ones, and that's incredibly important. It is a part of this victim-centered approach. We will continue to find ways to keep the Human Rights Council informed. That's also a very specific request that Dr. Yunus has put to me, and we will make sure that this is important. Just on more broader issue, and I've said it in my press conference in Dhaka at the time, it's a huge chance for the country at this pivotal time to deal with its past, to overcome its past, to reach a moment of healing and truth-telling, and that includes each and everyone within the society of Bangladesh. And it includes religious, ethnic, whatever differences you may have, but it is one country. It is one citizenship. And that's really what I think is happening at the moment, also through the reform efforts, which I think all of us have to support, because it is meant from the perspective of anchoring human rights very much in the governance of the future of the country. And that's a unique opportunity for each and every citizen of Bangladesh, irrespective of, they belong to whatever group or community. And that's really, I think, one of the big hopes that we have on the human rights front. And I remember my first telephone conversation with Dr. Yunus. He said human rights is at the center of the reform and of the transition. And of course, this is hard work. There's no doubt about it. This is not easy. But I think if there is the right spirit of everyone, of the political parties, of the different communities, to get it in this direction, there is huge hope for the world to have a story of hope to tell in what is otherwise, frankly, a very difficult environment all over the place. So I really think we need to grasp the opportunity, support the opportunities that arise, and do our utmost to support this process of transition in this country. So thank you again very much for coming.
Thank you, High Commissioner. We end on that hopeful note. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all your questions, but please feel free to reach out to the office directly with any follow-ups. Thank you.
Selection.
No, there were.